Before my joyous period of semi-retirement, which has given me a lot of time to think, I spent 10 years at Google, a couple of years at Skyscanner, and for the last 10 years I've been very interested in what makes teams high-performing. I've also had a lot of material to work with because I've either managed directly or indirectly a large number of teams, and back when I was at Google I was part of rolling out the Project Aristotle work on effective teams. So I spent a not inconsiderable part of my life talking to people in fairly broken situations. And one of the common themes that I've seen in teams, particularly ones which are performing well, is their relationship with time. And the teams which are really high performing seem to have more time than everybody else to get things done. They're never hurried. They always hit their deadlines. They have flex. They're able to take on new crises as they show up. And teams which are struggling never have enough time. And they always feel like they're behind and they're under pressure. And this has a serious knock-on effects. And the way we think about time can help us have a much greater impact in our life. Now, Benjamin Franklin said that time is money. And time is the most valuable currency that we have as human beings on this planet. We have a finite amount of it. Once it's gone, we don't get to earn more of it, unfortunately. And therefore, every moment of our existence is a precious piece of currency. And I'd like to thank you for investing some of your personal currency in coming to listen to me today when maybe the pub was calling and you're a bit burned out from the other talks. I'd also like to thank speakers before me who have given me colossal imposter syndrome for your excellent and insightful talks today. And hopefully I will live up to their high standards. So let's start with why. Why should we care? Why does your company care? Can you have more impact in less time? One of the things which was brought up earlier was people need to instill a sense of urgency into the teams. Actually, it's about having more effect in a shorter space of time. From a personal perspective, the more impact you have, the faster you progress your career. And if you're able to do that without it consuming your whole life, you have a personal life to go with that as well, and that should not be underestimated. And before I get into the full meat of this, I would like to offer some words of warning here. First of all, for the managers in the room, change comes from within. It is very, very difficult to externally force a change on another human being. If you would like to try this, I have a small social experiment. So take out a pen, turn to the person next to you, and try and write idiot across their forehead. I guarantee you are going to have a really hard time making this change happen. If they choose to write idiot, that's another matter and probably is self-fulfilling. Second of all, you need to lead by example. If you are not walking the walk in terms of how you're using your time and other people's time, nobody else is going to either. And in fact, the limiting factor on organizations is how their leaders behave and how they use their time and actually employ people around them. Lastly, using time well is not being busy. Busyness is a curse. And actually having time where you're not busy, where you're available to take on things as they come up, because they will, is vitally important. And the more senior you get, the more important it is to have that flex time. Finally, when I stopped working, I had about 200 people working for me. And if I was not keeping half of my week free of meetings, then I was not able to be there when people needed me, either for support, for guidance, for air cover, or any of the random things which happens to human beings in their lives. The last thing, while thinking about time can help teams progress themselves, as a manager, the last thing you should do is try and measure the time people are spending on things. In particular, do not try and centralize the measurement of how people are managing time. That is one of the fastest ways to get people to quit their jobs. Believe me, it really, really is. As soon as my manager says, what were you doing at 11 o'clock this morning? It's like, I don't know. Concentrate on outcomes. But this is a set of principles which will enable you to become more effective. Please do not use my teaching for evil. So first of all, what is the value of time? This is an interesting question. You can think of it a number of ways. Back in the day, I was on call for part of Google's ads business, which at the time was worth about $10 billion revenue a year. I can very quickly extrapolate the value of this. Now, I also was on call during both the Fukushima nuclear disaster and Hurricane Sandy in New York, where the internet was about 36 hours away from being bifurcated because most of the networking across the Atlantic goes into one building in downtown Manhattan, and that was flooded and the water levels were rising steadily. The stress when things go wrong is quite high, and if you look at it, you can lose $27 million in a day, which is both motivating and terrifying at the same time. In that instance, it is well worth employing a number of people to make sure the system is running smoothly on a full-time basis, but that may not be the best use of all of their time. What's your time worth to you? I did a quick search on Glassdoor, and the average software engineer in London earns £52,000 a year, which, if we extrapolate that out, works out at roughly £200 a day. But cost of employing somebody is double that. So to your company, just the cost of your time is £400 a day. Now, that's before any return on your investment. Let's assume that your company gets back £1 in revenue and they break even. Your time spent not working is worth £800 a day to your company. If you are profitable, your time is worth £1,200 a day to your company. Now, a simple sum means I can work out the cost of QCon, which is not going to endear me to the organizers. But if you look at the cost of everybody being here, it's about 2.8 million. Once you throw in the cost of your time in terms of paying you for your normal employment and the opportunity cost of you not being here, it works out at over £5 million to your company. You could probably start a couple of kick-ass startups for that kind of money, and this is 3 days of people's time. So when I'm saying thank you for investing this time, this has real value, and it's a little bit scary once you work the numbers out. Back when I was at Google, my first manager, who was deeply misanthropic, shared an essay on philosophy with me called The Basic Laws of Stupidity. Now, at the time, I thought he was celebrating our shared hatred of the human species. Looking back, I realized what he was trying to say was stop doing stupid things. And I have adapted this to how people spend time. Now, you can look at it as quadrants. There's two axes. Across the bottom is the value you're bringing to yourself. Up the side is the value you're bringing to others. Now, the intelligent person brings value to themselves and to people around them. If we were to use an analogy of pies for this, an intelligent person makes a bigger pie so people can eat more. A person who indulges in a zero-sum game takes your pie and eats it for themselves. A person who is hapless doesn't know there's pie being served and therefore doesn't have an opportunity to eat. And people who are harmful start a food fight with the pie so that nobody gets to eat. And when we're thinking about how we spend our time, think about the value we're bringing to ourselves. If we are not in the top right quadrant, we are either not going to be very happy with life or we're going to be causing harm to other people. By the way, there's not really such a thing as a zero-sum game, because if you are in a work relationship with somebody and your success is predicated on them losing something, the next time you interact with them is going to be much harder for you. Therefore, you want to create these situations where everyone's success is aligned. Somebody in a team who sees everybody else get promoted when they've been working just as hard as everybody else, but has no route to promotion to themselves, is not likely to support the team's success in the long term. So this comes to 4 things I hold to be true with high-performing teams' relationship with time. The first is they invest in how they use time over a period of time. They are getting better over time. Second, they respect other people's time. Now, when I started this talk after 30 years in the industry, and I realized that we have a real problem in our industry and how we respect each other's time, there are about 500 slides of people who have pissed me off over the years and wasted my time. And once I got that cathartically out of my system, I realized I had to reframe it into something positive. I have a lot of examples, and both good use of time and not so good use of time, which we will get to. They're ruthless about time. They don't do things which don't bring them value. They are willing to say no to things which don't make sense. And lastly, they're able to anticipate things in advance. They know that there are unknown unknowns in any situation, and yet they're able to mitigate them effectively in the course of getting things done so that they're not crippling to what they're working on. So let's start with investment improvement. So first of all, at any point in time, if you talk to somebody in an engineering team and say, how are things going? They're likely to say, everything is shit. because they look at the things which are stopping them getting things done. And there are going to be no situations in your life where somebody comes to you and says, it is too easy to get things done here. You are never going to have that conversation as a manager, which is kind of sad. And if you look at a single data point, you are never going to be a happy person. It's very easy to join that person in a kind of mutual despair at how the world is so unfair and you're swimming through treacle and it's never going to get better. If you have 2 data points, however, you have an opportunity to have a real conversation about things. If your trajectory is up and to the right, then you can talk about what are the things we did which enabled us to get better. How do we do more of those things? And by the way, if we were like that 6 months ago, in 6 months' time, we're going to be up here and things are going to be much better again. Let's keep doing this. If things are down and to the right, you have a problem, but you now have an opportunity to course correct that problem. It could be you're generating too much tech debt. It could be that there's not enough domain knowledge in the team. It could be people are leaving the team. It could be the requirements are broken. But knowing the trajectory across different data points means you can chart that the team's doing well, and you have that feedback loop to tell them, keep doing the things that you're doing. If you have a team which is struggling with time, first question you should ask them is, how easy is it to do the simple things? I had a team a few years back where they hadn't actually pushed to production in 3 years. They were not happy with life. And they had just inherited the code base for a quite large number of millions of users product from another team with not much support on how to get things done. And they had a lot of pressure from a part of the organization around support costs for that product. And one of the things that they wanted to change was actually a button. It took them 5 weeks to change that button once they'd gone through the privacy reviews, the legal reviews, the testing, the internationalization, the experiments to demonstrate it was having the effect it was going to have. Now, this is not particularly motivating, but this is the shortest cycle time they could go through to learn how to get better. And the teams which are really great are the ones that make the simple things look effortless. A change which should take an hour to get from conception to production takes an hour. And how you get them down that journey is how many times you can go through that cycle, reducing steps every single time. If a team is struggling and you give them an 18-month project to invent a new tech, they're never going to deliver it. So when a team is having a hard time, start them with the simple things. Once you get good at the simple things, then you can progress to things which are more complicated. The next question is the eternal friction between product and engineering. So product wants features, and the business wants features. Engineering wants to build infrastructure. This is the wrong question. What if the team is the product? What if part of the work you're doing is to make your team as effective as possible and invest in that? And what are the feedback loops and conversations which need to happen to enable that to happen? I'll also say as well, if you're not investing in moving faster as a team and removing friction, you're going to be moving slower because you're going to be accruing tech debt of short-term gain. I had another team who were really, really struggling with this. And to the point where their weekly sprint goals, they were missing like 85% of them. And their stakeholders were quite vocal about things not going well. And we came to an alignment that, well, before we try and come up with your 6-month plan and a plan for these milestones, which, by the way, if we can't plan over a week, there's no point trying to plan over 6 months. That is cruel and unusual punishment. Why don't we get to the point where we deliver on our promises every week? So at the end of every week, we'll look at whether we achieved what we said we were going to achieve. Now, if we did, great. If we didn't, why not? Okay, is there a way of adding something to the backlog which will allow us to move quicker next week? And we found that kind of a 1-2 week cycle gave us a good number of iterations where we can make small cumulative improvements where you get the compound interest of like 2, 3, 4% gains, which don't feel like much at the time, but over the course of a year can turn a team into a completely different creature altogether. It also gives ownership to the team over how they go about working. If a team is not investing in making their lives better, they are going to be pretty miserable. And that sense of ownership and purpose cannot be underestimated. This is the one which might take a bit of time, and I need to not turn into a big ranty shout. Respecting each other's time. Even more years ago, I used to work with somebody who, they worked kind of 7 o'clock till 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they had family commitments. And on Friday afternoon at lunchtime when they went home, they committed all their code into CVS, which is how long ago it was, and just went home. Now, so the problem here was there were no unit tests, and they hadn't even bothered to compile their code. So for the next 8 or 9 hours, the rest of the team basically were forced into debugging their code. In fact, this was the motivator in my life towards test-driven development so that I could quickly work through the chain of suffering that this person's changes had come through. Time is also the basis of trust. If time is the most valuable currency we have, if other people are spending our most precious commodity and they're not spending it well, this is not going to lead to a healthy relationship between us. And the way we spend each other's time is as important, or maybe more so in a high-performing team, than the way we spend our own time. And thinking about using each other's time as constructively as possible and bringing value to other people with your interactions is the bedrock of every high-trust, high-performing team. One of my more cynical questions, and DNS does not stand for Domain Name Resolution Service, is what would be the outcome of the do-nothing scenario in a situation? If you have just spent, let's take, for example, hypothetically, there's a board meeting tomorrow, and your manager at 5 o'clock in the afternoon says, I need you to get me some numbers and write some slides for me for tomorrow. You stay up to midnight, you get the slides done. They don't use the slides. Thanks. Right, the outcome there, if you had gone that night and gone out and done something completely different, the outcome would have been the same. Every time you spend somebody's time and there is no value created as a result of it, either to that person or other people, you are harming your relationship with them. And there are a finite number of times you can ask somebody and put them into that situation before they basically say, okay, thanks, bye, and they go off and find another job. You have to be really careful when you're doing those kinds of things. I had another situation where the manager where they wanted me to run an initiative. So I wrote a proposal, reviewed it, peer reviewed it, got started. This was kind of a side project for me, so I didn't have my full bandwidth. Things were just starting to happen. 2 months in, they said, actually, we'd like you to change what you're working on. I'm like, okay, not super motivating. Okay, rewrite the proposal, get started again. 2 months later, same thing happened again. Deep breath, I'm going to be calm and rational about this. So the next iteration of it, I actually had to recruit a group of people to help work on the next initiative. And I found about 20 people around the business who were willing to invest their time in making things better. I spoke to each of them individually. I got them excited about things. I got them aligned with what they needed to do. 2 months later, same thing happened again. I had to go and tell every single one of those people that their efforts were not appreciated and that actually we weren't going to be doing that anymore. I quit 3 days later, by the way, after a calling off period where I removed all of the expletives from my resignation letter. This was the situation, if we go back to the quadrants, like this is the harmful, this is starting a food fight with the pie situation. If you are spending people's time and actually the net benefit is negative, this is not intelligent behavior. This is not something which is going to inspire people to turn up and to give their all and to be committed to the cause. There are also some phrases we should probably get rid of our vocabulary. I'm always amused by the English people, what they say, what they mean, and what Americans hear kind of things. Interestingly, there's a column for me which is, you are absolutely insane, and you do not want to know what the next 2 columns on that actually say. But these are phrases which we frequently use when we are trying not to do something. And I'm going to put it to you that each one of these phrases, in some respect, is a microaggression. It is telling the other person that your time is more valuable than theirs is. I'm too busy to do a task is not the discussion you need to have. It is, what is the priority of what we're working on? Usually people say, I'm too busy. Reality is they're crap at managing their time, or it's not important. It's okay to say, this is not important. It's an adult conversation rather than talk to the hand, I'm too busy. Sorry I'm late, my meeting overran. Actually, meetings overrun all the time. We should get better at running meetings. But the message you're sending to people is, my time is more important than yours, so it's okay for you to wait around. These things happen from time to time, right? Life gets in the way. If this is a regular tone and content of communication, people are not going to want to work with each other. I particularly like the task update one as well. That's another one which is great. The let's have a status update meeting, which is, I have no idea what's going on, which should actually be, how do we communicate better and share context, rather than here's a last-minute panic to get some information, which we maybe should automate as part of a future iteration. When I did a Google image search for interruption, this was one of the first things which came up, and it seems particularly apt. This is Kanye West interrupting Taylor Swift at the MTV Music Awards to say that somebody else should have won the awards. Not the most polite thing that a human being has ever done. Now, interruption is an interesting thing because when we're interrupted, we lose our entire train of thought and have to start again. If you want to completely screw somebody's productivity, interrupt them every 15 minutes over the course of the day. They will get nothing done. In fact, the quality of their decision-making goes down by anything up to 25% over the course of an interruption. If we want people to do high-quality work, we should only interrupt them when there is an important reason to do so. The person who comes over to you and asks you that question, which you type verbatim into Google, and then read them the answer in the hope that they will stop doing that, having discovered this incredible tool called Google. That interruption brings you no value. It takes value away from your life for something the person was capable of doing themselves. When I go back to the example of Google SRE and PagerDuty, whilst it may be interesting from a monetary perspective to interrupt people when there's any possibility of an outage at Google, if you're paging somebody every 30 seconds or so, eventually you're going to get pager fatigue and they're just going to stop answering the pages because the signal to noise ratio is going to be just simply too low for somebody. And when you're interrupting people, think of the signal that you are bringing to that person versus the noise that you are bringing into their life. If you're bringing noise into their life, you are disrespecting their time. This is another very passionately held subject for me. So when you're developing code, imagine you run in a world where you've agreed you're going to submit code in like 200-line blocks or a fairly low number of things so that you're not overloading people. And it takes you about an hour maybe to write 200 lines of code. It then takes 3 days for somebody to send the first review back to that code, and that review is, needs more work. And then you write some more code, so that's another 20 minutes. 3 days later, they come back and go, yeah, I guess that's okay. The dominant amount of time required to make that change is not in you doing the work, it's in the feedback cycle to get that to the next stage. High-performing teams know this, and they commit to each other to respond quickly and to run through these kind of decision-making things as quickly as possible. Think of it from a company perspective. Have you ever been in misalignment with another team in your company? And you pour, and I've seen this happen too many times for it to be funny, a month of your life into arguing a particular course of action until eventually one group of people just says, look, I just don't have the energy for this conversation anymore, just do what you want. But they're not really committed to it, they've just given up. That month of emotional energy you just poured into that decision-making has just been flushed away. It's wasted. How do you get through that decision-making loop as quickly as possible? And one of the roles of a leader is to be very clear about how decisions get made and to make sure that they happen in a timely, constructive, and inclusive manner. If that is not happening, then people are not committed to decisions which are made, so they will still secretly sabotage each other afterwards, and everything grinds to a halt. What you do see when teams behave well is a set of behaviors which is quite uplifting. They're responsive to each other. They are available when people need them. It's not like schedule a meeting for a week's time because everyone's calendars are full of recurring status update meetings. They say thank you for people's time. One thing I had in one of my teams at Google was we had a lot of new grads, and coming to Google where your code was peer-reviewed and there were readability standards and other things that you had to go through was new to a lot of the people joining the team. And it became quite adversarial initially. It's like, why are you reviewing my code? Just accept it and push it through. That's not a good way to be. And we agreed that actually the person who's given time to review your code has given time, their most precious gift of all. If someone's given you a gift, you say thank you. So before you get into your diatribe about why yours is the only canonical Python idiom, maybe say thank you for reviewing my code. And the tone of those conversations changed overnight because people realized that somebody had invested in them. In fact, research shows that if people don't say thank you for you doing something, you are half as likely to help them in future. That's pretty terrifying. They volunteer to help each other. One of the highest performing teams I ever managed. Anytime one of the team was going through a launch, everybody else would drop what they were doing and make sure that they had the support to go through it smoothly. So rather than one person having to stay until midnight, worrying that they were about to bring down everything, they left like 5 hours earlier, and they had that safety net because they were all invested in each other's success. They had the highest promotion rate of any team I have ever seen, like 45% a year. That's insane. And when they spend each other's time, they spend it respectfully, they spend it well. If you're not seeing those behaviors in your team, if people are siloed off with their headphones on, refusing to talk to each other, only doing code reviews at the end of the week, you're not having an environment where people are going to be high performing. So here are some simple rules for kind of a social contract for respecting each other's time. The teams which invest in each other achieve more. So Victoria's example from earlier with the data scientists and the software engineers, when they realized they could help each other and accelerate each other's own efforts, that is what we want to see. That is the team which is greater than the sum of its parts. Understanding the gift of time. Do not underestimate how valuable this is, particularly as you get older and you have less of it left. The misuse of time destroys trust faster than nearly anything else. If you want to move faster, reduce your decision-making and feedback loops. Pare them down. By the way, one of the nice anti-patterns when you screw up the feedback loop cycle is people start to behave in antisocial ways to work around the problem. You get things like, and this happened to me, somebody sent me a 20,000-line change list Thursday evening. It said, I need to commit this by tomorrow, so can you just approve it? Computer says no. I have some concerns with your code. It's 20,000 lines. So first of all, this is going to take me about 2 weeks of time to give you an adequate review. You don't have the time to make any corrective changes to it. This is Python, and you have no unit tests. So thanks. Also, no. When the system's not working, people find novel ways to make it even more broken. And finally, interrupts. Only do it when there's value. As a manager, there is a temptation. You need some information. Your boss has just asked you a question. You go over to someone. Can you just answer this for me? They will answer this for you, but they'll stop working on the thing they were working on, which hopefully was the most important thing for them. Being ruthless about time. One of my old tech leads was insanely ruthless about time and about using meeting time well. And we used to have a weekly team meeting where people would demo things and we'd talk about what we were doing and, more importantly, why we were doing it and the impact it was having. And we didn't always take the time required for this. And at the point the meeting stopped being useful, he'd just close his laptop, get up and say, right, we're done here, and start walking out. Now, this was not good for my ego. But actually, it was positive on a number of levels. First of all, he has chosen the most effective use of his time, and he is exercising that right. This is a good thing. Second of all, he's showing that authority can be told where to go, which, whilst I didn't want to encourage too much of, is actually positive from a perspective of building psychological safety. Now, from the other side of psychological safety, the fact that he was so direct about it made another group of people feel uncomfortable, so then we had the other conversation of how would you do this in a way which was inclusive for the whole team and allowed them to grow from the experience. So everybody won, apart from my ego, which I'm still not over. Thought I had technical problems for a moment. Right, so this is a life-changing piece of magic. For the last year of my life, I've spent a lot of time coaching people at director or soon-to-be director level. And one of the common threads which runs through their existence is there are not enough hours in the day to get stuff done. The more senior you get, the more the demands on your time grows. In fact, it grows exponentially. And this is Eisenhowers Matrix. And you rate things by whether how important they are and what urgency they are. And if you want to understand how broken your life is, you can get a team to write down all of the tasks and responsibilities they have and put it in one of these quadrants. And depending on which quadrants they're in, you can tell them fairly quickly where the problem lies. So, first of all, anything in the top right corner, if it's urgent and important, it's a crisis. If all of your things are in crisis mode, people are going to burn out pretty quickly. If things are urgent but not important, they are a distraction. But the problem is we tend to work on the things where people are noisiest. And in a situation where people have got lots of low importance, high urgency requests, where they just are impatient for answers, typically what happens is we do the things which are in distraction before the important things which are not urgent. And then what happens is the important things which are not urgent become urgent. And now, rather than working on the things which are highest importance to us in a deliberate and controlled manner, we are now doing them from a reactionary, panicked manner, which means the quality of work is going to be less. Understand where things sit on these quadrants. Ignore the trivia. Admittedly, if you're just ignoring something someone's asked you to do, you should probably tell them about it as a courtesy, but you shouldn't be working on these things. You should only be working on the things which bring the most value at any point in time. And high-performing teams know what are the most important tasks they can be working on. Now, for anyone who has worked for me, you're going to recognize these three questions because I use them probably to the point of you feeling sick of my existence. The way teams know what is important, what problem are we working on? If you want to find out quickly whether an organization is aligned around what they're trying to achieve, you ask them, what problem are you trying to solve here? And when you get n different answers, you know that nothing's going to get done because you're all going to be pulling in different directions. What is the value of doing this? It might be fascinating to build a machine learning model to determine the correct temperature of coffee in the micro kitchen at all times based upon flow and the number of people who are going to need coffee, but whether that is aligned with what the company needs to achieve is highly debatable. And lastly, who do you need to do this task with? Who are the people you have to align with and work with to get things done? Because this is the overhead on how much context sharing and how much communication you're going to have to do. And in fact, slides wrong order. Never mind, I'll work around it. Pretend you didn't see that yet. The context overhead of communication is another cost in terms of time. If you have 8 people in a team, so like 6-person squad, engineering manager, product manager, 36 connections between them, the overhead of keeping all of those people in sync across all things at all times is astronomical. The perfect unit of work, or in terms of context sharing, probably about 3 people. No less than 2, because anyone working on their own is a fragility in the system which doesn't survive the first holiday or worst case scenario, bus hit, and yes, that has also happened. Any more than 4, and the cost of them interoperating is also going to be too high. And what happens in a team which is struggling is you wind up with the paralysis anti-pattern of everybody is involved in every single meeting and every single decision. Getting 8 people to agree on anything is difficult. You may not want to pay that cost. So get people to talk about what the ideal unit of work and collection of people is going to be. It doesn't matter if you break up your team to do it. In fact, you're likely to be a member of multiple teams anyway within your organization, because you might be part of a guild, you might be part of an initiative which spans a number of teams, you might be part of a tribe, you might be an engineering manager and you have your engineering peer group who are also another team that you're part of. And you want to minimize the size of those teams because if you're spending all of your time sharing context, you wind up coming up with increasingly convoluted and painful ways of trying to make sure everybody has all context at all time, because the cost of missing context is very high in some cases. And so you wind up spending all of your time sharing information rather than getting things done. You want to keep your process and overhead to a minimum so that you can be making progress with the most time as possible. There's also the difference between deliberate use of time in terms of sharing context and serendipitous. Back at Google, famously, free food is given out to people. And oh, how I miss that, although now I have been forced to learn how to cook and take care of myself, so I am no longer in danger of starvation. Actually, the value to Google of those meals is beyond any number they could spend on actually giving people food, because teams go to lunch together. And you put a group of engineers in a room, they talk shop. This is the reason why NASA stipulate in their contracts, because they make duplicate systems of everything, that not only do they choose companies from different sides of the country, so they're less likely to talk to each other, but they are, part of the contract is that you can't talk to the other company working on the other component, because what happened is they used to take people from the East Coast and West Coast, and there was an aeronautics conference, and two people working on the same guidance system met in the hotel bar, and they started talking shop, and they were both wrong in the same way. And they went off and built the same systems. Rocket took off, first system started failing, okay, switch over to a backup system continued failing, rocket turned into a big pile of debris falling from the heavens. You want to make sure that people are talking shop, because this is where you find out that somebody in another team is working on the same thing as you as early as possible. This is where you find out that the problem you're running into, somebody has solved before and can short circuit the solution for you. This cheapens what you're doing. And having a way of having serendipitous conversations which stimulate people coming together, not necessarily with a definite purpose, is worth the investment. If you're only working on deliberate planned things, you miss out on this opportunity. And the larger your company gets, the more that is going to hurt you. I have another example of two teams at Google who were working on the same problem. They found they were working on the same problem, and they used to go to each other's launch review meetings to torpedo each other's launch so they could be the first person to launch that feature. Not necessarily the place you want to get to. Pretending that we went more forward for a moment. Good teams minimize waste. You can ask the question, what are we doing to fail quickly? If people can't answer that question, they're probably coming up with waterfall plans where it's just assumed everything is going to work. Do not underestimate the cost of change, both in terms of time and emotion to people. Another team I inherited them, and for the previous 2 years, they'd had their goal cancelled and changed every 6 months. And one of the first acts I had as their manager was to give them a new goal. I was not the most popular person in that team. And actually seeing the effect that had on them was astonishing. So first of all, when they had been told to cancel previous goals, they hadn't been allowed to delete the code from the code base, so they were still on the hook for supporting services that they weren't allowed to go and spend time fixing as the infrastructure changed underneath them. This was taking about 2-person days a week of effort just to keep the lights on these things. Second of all, if you think that your work is going to be thrown away in 6 months' time or just stopped, you have no incentive. You are not committed to getting things done. You are not committed to high quality. You don't really care because it doesn't matter. And it took a while to work through the implications of that. In fact, the promise I made to them upon the 5th change was, first of all, you're going to work on the goal that I am most excited about. So you have the most high-profile thing I have, which also means you deal with me a lot, so there are downsides to this. Second of all, if they change your goal in 6 months' time, I'm just going to quit on the spot, because this can't happen again. And even then, it took a year for any kind of trust to regrow in that relationship. It's incredibly painful, because when you change, it's not just a case of, all right, tomorrow we're working on this. You have to disentangle yourself from the previous situation. People might have careers which are based upon a feature, like they won't get promoted unless something's delivered. So their personal interest is not aligned with what's happening. And it's if you'd done nothing for 6 months, we'd still be in the same position, except worse, because you have to support what you wrote and you can't make it better. Also think about the skills that you need in order to cut down on waste of time. So Most companies have 360 feedback and promo processes, and every 6 to 12 months, everything stops for a month while everyone tries to figure out how to do that in a way which isn't going to offend their colleagues. We're crap at giving feedback. And if you're spending 2 weeks of your life writing feedback because you're not sure how to give it effectively, that's not a good use of time. You could spend a day learning how to give feedback effectively and get everything done in an afternoon. Surely that's a good investment of time. Writing technical design documents, also we're not great at. Writing emails. Have you ever written an email which is 5 pages long and you've polished it to the point where it gleams in the sun, making your point, and then no one actually opened and read it? Right? People don't read email longer than about 2 paragraphs. How do we allow people to write more effectively so that the people reading it can make a decision sooner rather than having to consume more information? We are constantly beset with too much information in our day jobs. If we're better at sending it in condensed and useful form for each other, we save everybody time. So being ruthless with time is about working on the highest value things at any point in time. It's about being willing to say, this brings no value, and to invest your time in something which is going to bring you value. It's about keeping sub-teams small. It's about not having everybody in every single situation, even though that feels like the inclusive things to do. It's about communicating directly with people so that you're not having multiple context hops, or you need a decision, you talk to your manager, they talk to their manager, they talk to their manager, then they talk back down, and like a week later you hear what the decision is without any of the context associated with it. Those things are crippling to the productivity, happiness and effectiveness of teams. And lastly, great teams anticipate problems. They are able to deal with ambiguity in a way which seems almost magical. We know that the cost of resolving a problem versus the time required to detect a problem raises exponentially, and yet we still build these massive waterfall charts where we do the easy things first, and then the hard things we defer until the end of our project. We still plan for the golden path where everything works out fine, even though history tells us that every time we do this, we have a really bad time. We still spend the first 3 months of a 6-month project blissfully happy that everything's going well, and then like somebody trying to hand in their university homework, cram it into the last few nights and burn ourselves out. We still do this. And in fact, part of the problem is plans. This is a great quote, because this is exactly how I feel about it. Your plan is wrong. I can say that with a high degree of confidence without even looking at it, because no plan of any complexity can possibly account for all of the things which are going to go wrong along the way. People will get sick. You'll be adopting a new technology which you haven't necessarily understood all of the implications of. Requirements will change. The law will change in some cases. The reality is the act of planning to understand the shape of what you're trying to achieve is an incredibly powerful activity, because it gives you a rough feeling of the shape of what you're trying to achieve. But in its worst situation, a plan is deeply disempowering for a team. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, one which went really badly and one which kind of went well. So another team I had, they were working on a large-scale migration from one system to another, and they had a multi-hundred-line spreadsheet of all of the tasks which were required to get from A to B. And against each task, they had a percentage done. And every week, 15 people for an hour and a half got in a room, and they were asked individually, what percentage are you through this? I was 83%. Okay, that's good. That's right, my next one. All right. And it was a month before the project was supposed to be shipped. Everything was on track. 3 months later, the project hadn't been shipped because they weren't talking about the outcomes they were trying to achieve. The project plan had become the outcome, and it had become about showing that the plan was green and on track as the thing they were trying to achieve, rather than focusing on the actual problem they were trying to solve. For the people working on this, this prevented them from actually coming up with more intelligent solutions to the problems in front of them, because they needed to fit them to the actual plan of delivery that they were working against, rather than trying to understand the problem and the context they were operating against. And when we ran the retro for that project, people had PTSD from filling in this spreadsheet. It was like, I never want to go back to this place. Please don't make me go there. I was like, okay, it's okay. let's hug it out. Everything's fine. And they're like, no, we don't want to hug you. And I was like, fine, okay. So whilst planning is great, understand that your plan is subject to change. The more complicated your plan, the greater the amount of time you're going to spend correcting it when it does change. Because a plan which you make 6 months ago and has changed and you don't update is equally harmful. And therefore, if you're thinking about the time you're investing in keeping your plan up to date, this is also time you could be spending on something else. A good rule of thumb is use the smallest amount of process possible in order to be effective. And anything more than that is just vanity for the people running the processes. Apologies to the project managers in the room. But this is about, the plan is a tool to solve a problem. It is not the solution in and of itself. So the other plan I'll talk about is somehow I got volunteered to run the GDPR response at Google for a fairly large product, which I'm going to assume was punishment for being a smartass and speaking my mind too much. At the start of this project, we all got in a room, and okay, this is a problem. So this is part of Google Maps. To give you an idea of the complexity here, Google Maps is built up of maybe several billion entities, each comprising of up to 1,000 or several thousand data points gathered from about, let's say charitably, 100 different sources, none of which are actually authoritative, some of which Google doesn't actually have the permission to use past a certain point or for certain purposes, but given by lots of different people. It is a privacy nightmare understanding what data you own, what you have the ability to access, and what people should have control over. In fact, we triggered a large number of gray areas in the GDPR regulation where our lawyers just went, I don't know, just do what you feel is the right thing, and as long as we've documented it, we can show good intent. Thanks. But this was the situation. The timescale was non-negotiable, and being an employee of Google meant we were pretty much guaranteed that one of the first companies who were going to be knocked on the door of by the European Union, who do like finding Google, was going to be us. So there was no real flex in getting things done. So our plan was, okay, everything we're doing should be on the assumption that we're going to finish this 3 months early. And we're going to work on the assumption it's all going to go wrong. And rather than trying to plan all of these things out in advance, we're just going to accept this whole thing is broken. And along the way, we're going to have to ask all of the hard questions up front, because it might take weeks in some cases to get an answer through lawyers or through the EU councils, just to have a sense of what we're doing here. It wound up being delivered about a month early, but if we had planned this the normal way, there would have been a potential for a fairly large fine along the way here. When you are planning towards a non-negotiable deadline, work from the basis that everything is going to fail. And in fact, some rules for planning. If your plan does not include the ability to cope with your inevitable failure, it is wrong. How do you plan to fail as cheaply as possible, as early in the process as possible, so you have the opportunity to solve things? One of the conversations you never want to have as a software engineer with your management or the CEO of the company is, so, we were going to launch today. We're actually kind of not, and we don't know when we're going to be ready to launch. Those are not enjoyable conversations to have. The sooner you understand that your plan is wrong, the sooner you're able to align your stakeholders with that and have an adult conversation about what you drop in terms of scope if the deadline is non-negotiable, or how you change the team dynamics to actually deliver on things. Your plan is not free to maintain. Make it as cheap as possible. Make it as meaningful as possible to maintain that plan. When you're talking about delivery of tasks or milestones, what are the things preventing us getting this done? It's much more empowering conversation than what percentage are we through this. That might be something you ask as a sanity check, but if it's the only question you ask, bad things are going to happen. And your plan will become the outcome in that situation. People are very good at delivering outcomes, but it does not lead to the delivery of high-quality software. And then finally, and this is like just to reinforce the Accelerate book, which I'm sure most people have read, how quickly you can recover from failure also determines the level of risk you're willing to take on in your plan, because if it takes you a month to change something in production after the error's been detected, you probably want to catch things earlier in the process and invest in that rather than assuming you can just fix things on the fly. So if you're developing an operating system for a nuclear submarine, for example, where it may not surface for 6 months to get your software update over the air, you are going to be much more defensive in your approach to detecting problems early. Now, thanks to James, I'm not the first person giving a quote from one of the Stoic philosophers here today. And the thought I would like to leave you with is from Marcus Aurelius. Time is the most precious thing that we have. We should be savoring it. We should be endeavoring to be our best selves, both individually and collectively at all time. And if we are not making the best use of that, we are not fulfilling our potential as human beings. And the way we use our own time and other people's time is either empowering or limiting on our ability to fulfill that potential. So with that, I would like to thank you. And has anybody got any questions? No?